All right, anybody who's watched the last two Pitt football games can tell you that the Panthers offense has been much better with Mason Hechel than it was in the 4 games preceding that. But how much better has it been? How good has it actually been? You've watched it, and it looks much better. You've probably seen some of the numbers, and they look much better. But I got the old legal pad out to dig into a few more stats about this offense and how good they've been in the last 2 games, particularly how they were compared to the first 4 games, and maybe more relevantly, the 2 games that immediately preceded the last 2. So let's do a little comparison. Let's do a little number talk, and let's generally pontificate on Pitt's offense with Mason Hechel at the reins. At the reins? Is that handing him the reins? At the controls? At the something? I forgot how that phrase ends, but let's keep our voice from cracking as well. Let's talk a little bit more about Pitt's offense with Mason Hechel, what it's looked like over the past 2 games, what they've accomplished, how good they've been here on the Wednesday edition of the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, suffice to say, Pitt's offense has been much better in the last 2 games than they were in the 4 games preceding it, and certainly the 2 games that immediately came before, the 2 Power 4 games. No surprise then that Pitt lost those first 2 Power 4 games and won the most recent 2 Power 4 games. But I want to dig a little bit more into the numbers. We won't make this entirely about Mason Hechel versus Eli Holstein, because one of my main takeaways from the last 2 games, compared to the 2 games that came before it and really the first 4 games of the season, and I'm not the first to say this, is not just that the offense is producing more, that they're scoring more. They had 48 and 34 in back-to-back weeks. They're putting up more yards and doing all these things, moving the ball. Everything just seems to move better. Everything seems to work better. Things are smoother. Things aren't perfect. Right, there was the option play that Mason Hechel threw it off Juelz Goff's back in the Florida State game. I think they had some kind of double reverse thing that they tried to do that got sort of blown up. I mean, they haven't been perfect in the last 2 games, but they've been damn close, and they've just looked really smooth. Like we've talked for so long over the last 19 games about what is the Cade Bell offense? What's it supposed to look like? How close does it get? Last year we talked about it during the year. Like there would be stretches you say, okay, that's what the offense is supposed to be. We asked Cade Bell. I asked him in the spring. What was the game last year? It was either the spring or the summer. I forget. During one of the camps, either spring camp or training camp, asked him, what was the game last year where you feel like it really clicked? Like the offense was what it's supposed to be, and it looked like what it's supposed to look like. This is an ongoing conversation. In that instance, he pointed to the North Carolina game because there was a lot of inconsistency in the offense throughout the year last year, even in the first 7 games when they were winning. The Cincinnati game, we've talked about it a million times, right? They have 40 bad minutes, like really bad. And then they have 20 great minutes. The West Virginia game, they win it at the end after some inconsistent offense. So the North Carolina game last year was probably their most consistent offensive performance, particularly against a Power 4 opponent and an ACC team. But outside of that, they weren't particularly good offensively against Cal. Syracuse, they didn't really need to do a whole lot. SMU, they could just never really keep up with SMU. And you started getting into the injury issues with the Virginia game, the Clemson game, the Louisville game, the Boston College game. You started running into these injury problems with the offensive line and with Eli Holstein, and it became really difficult, I think, for this offense to find what it's supposed to be, or to be what it was supposed to be, and the Toledo game included. And so you come into this year and you get the Duquesne game, you get the Central Michigan game, and they put up points. 61 against Duquesne and 45 against Central Michigan. They were scoring. They're averaging 50 points per game. But it still didn't feel like maybe it was moving the way it was supposed to move, or it was doing what it was supposed to do. And you get into the West Virginia and Louisville games, and it really wasn't working. It really wasn't happening the way it's supposed to happen, or moving the ball down the field the way it's supposed to move. And I think one of the biggest things is the last 2 games, it just felt like it was going according to plan. The offense was moving the ball the way they want to move the ball. We talked countless times about those 4th downs on that first drive against Florida State, where the 3rd down plays all set Pitt up for 4th and 1. or even like the first drive against Boston College, the first drive, just chipping away. This willingness and ability to take what the defense gave the offense. And Mason Hechel did it. The receivers did it. The running backs, the tight ends. I've often talked about that first third down of the second half against Florida State, where Mason Hechel had just thrown 2 third down interceptions to close the first half by forcing the ball downfield or pushing it downfield. And whether you want to say they were good decisions or bad decisions, and we've talked about it a number of times, to come out on the first third down of the second half, a 3rd and 6, and just go to Desmond Reed right at the line to gain. Nothing crazy. Not forcing it downfield, not trying to throw a deep post or something like that. You just drop back. There's your guy. He's got a first down. Take that first down. Worst case scenario, you get a fresh set of downs. Best case scenario, you get what happened, which is Desmond Reed turns a little gain into a big gain. And that was the kind of thing that we've seen, or that is the kind of thing we've seen over the last 2 games, is just consistent, effective offense. Cade Bell has said since he arrived that he wanted to lead the country in first downs. That's not necessarily like a big play offense. I mean, he wants the big plays for sure. They want to strike if they can. But Cade Bell wants to take what you will give him, and if that's a bunch of 6 to 8 yard passes or 4 to 6 yard passes, he will take that over and over and over and over again and gain first down after first down after first down to get downfield and win the game and score touchdowns and ultimately win the game. And that's been the approach, and I think that's what you've seen working so well in these last 2 games. And all of it, when you are able to chip away and be effective like that, it adds up to some pretty gaudy numbers. So let's talk about some of those gaudy numbers. In the last 2 games, Pitt's offense averaging 41 points per game, 489.5 yards per game, 326 passing yards per game, 163.5 rushing yards per game. They're 45.2% on third down over the last 2 games, and they're 6 of 6, a perfect 100% on fourth down over the last 2 games. Red zone points per possession, they're averaging 4.84 points per red zone possession. They're scoring touchdowns on 69.2% of their red zone possessions. We'll get into the context on those numbers, place that context nationally in a second. But I want to compare it, the last 2 games versus the first 4 games of the season. And again, I don't entirely want to make this an Eli Holstein versus Mason Hechel thing, but what was the biggest difference between the first 4 and the last 2? Because the numbers are pretty different. All right. In the first 4 games, Pitt averaged less than 40 points per game, 39.25. In the last 2 games, they averaged 41 points per game. In the first 4 games, Pitt averaged 403 yards per game, total offense, 403. In the last 2 games, they averaged almost 490. In the first 3 games, they averaged 301 passing yards per game. The last 2, 326. Rushing yards per game, 102 in the first 4 games, 163.5 in the last 2. Third downs. In the first 4 games, they converted 32% of their third downs. In the last 2 games, 45.2%. Like an increase of 13% of third down effectiveness. In the first 4 games, Pitt converted 4 out of 10 fourth down attempts. That's 40%. Obviously, you can do that math, right? I don't even need the calculator on that one. In the last 2 games, like I said, they're 6 of 6. Perfect 100%. Red zone, points per possession. First 4 games, 4.14. Last 2, 4.84. So 0.7 points more per red zone possession. And then red zone touchdown percentage, 52.9% in the first 4 games, 69.2%. So an increase of like 16 percentage points of more effectiveness. Total, they had 21 red zone drives in the first 4 games. They scored 11 touchdowns on 21 red zone drives. In the last 2 games, they've had 13 red zone drives and scored 9 touchdowns. So 9 out of 13, 13 to 9, as opposed to 21 to 11. But all those numbers that we just compared there, all those stats that I just gave you when I talk about the first 4 games, included the Duquesne and Central Michigan games. And probably going to skew the numbers a little bit there when they scored 60 against Duquesne and 45 against Central Michigan, right? So let's make it a little bit more comparable. Let's talk about the Power 4 games. And here's where the numbers get pretty wild. All right, so let's compare Pitt against Boston College and Louisville to Pitt, not Boston College and Louisville, Boston College and Florida State to Pitt versus West Virginia and Louisville. Okay? Against West Virginia and Louisville, points per game, Pitt averaged 25.5 points per game against West Virginia and Louisville. Boston College and Florida State, 41. Yards per game, 344 yards per game in those first two Power 4 games, 490 in the last two. Passing yards, 281 to 326. Rushing yards, 63 to 163. Literally 100 yards more per game in the last two compared to the West Virginia and Louisville games. And it's not just from having Desmond Reed back. I mean, that helps. But they had 172 rushing yards against Boston College, and Desmond Reed didn't play in that game. They had 126 total rushing yards in the West Virginia and Louisville games. 63 yards per game on the ground in those first two, 163 per game in the next two. Against West Virginia and Louisville, Pitt, third down conversions, 18.5% compared to 45.2%. And then the fourth downs, they were 2 of 6 in those first two games, 6 of 6 in the last two games. Pitt has converted more fourth downs in the last two games than they converted third downs in those first two Power 4 games. They were 5 of 27 on third down against West Virginia and Louisville. They are 6 of 6 on fourth down. That's a remarkable stat, don't you think? They have more fourth down conversions in the last two games than they had third down conversions in the previous two. It's and then, red zone numbers obviously are what you would expect them to be. They had 8 red zone possessions against West Virginia and Louisville. They scored 2 touchdowns, so 25% success rate. A few other things, sort of like national rankings. And what I did here, I mean, this is not entirely fair or accurate, although I think it's a notable way to compare stats. So I took what Pitt has averaged over the last two games and kind of put that on the national rankings. Not just what teams have averaged over the last 2 weeks, but what teams have averaged all season long. So Pitt is right now, in the last two games, they've averaged 41 points per game. If they average that over the course of a season, if that was their season-long average right now, they'd be tied for 11th in the country. And you say, well, 2 games versus 6, that's not really a comparison. True, but I think that's offset a little bit by the fact that all these teams that played 5 or 6 games so far have had, at least one FCS game, probably a G5 team or something like that. So maybe it balances a little bit. The yards per game, they'd be 11th in the country. Rushing or passing yards per game, what they averaged over the last 2 games, if they did that over the course of a season, they'd be 2nd in the nation in passing yards. Rushing yards, it'd be 63rd, but it's 163.5. I think that's a great rushing average. Third downs, they'd be tied for 35th in the country in third down conversion percentage. Fourth down, obviously being 6 of 6, they'd be tied for first. They'd be tied with Tennessee. The only other team that's perfect on fourth down this year, and Tennessee is 3 of 3. So Pitt has a bit of an advantage there. Red zone points per possession. I always say I like to go by points per red zone of possession and then red zone touchdown percentage, because I think those are a better indicator of how successful you are in the red zone as opposed to the NCAA, which just goes by scoring percentage, basically equates a touchdown and a field goal. In terms of points per red zone possession, Pitt's, what they've done in the last 2 games would rank 34th nationally. They'd be ahead of Ohio State, Georgia Tech, Ole Miss, Notre Dame, Virginia, all ranked behind their season numbers ranked behind what Pitt has done in the last 2 games with Mason Hechel at quarterback. And then the red zone touchdown percentage, 69%. That would rank 41st nationally. They'd be ahead of Ole Miss, Florida, SMU, Virginia. Some decent teams out there that Pitt is better than them right now. I mean, I guess what we're getting to with all of these numbers is in the last 2 games, Pitt has legitimately been one of the best offenses in the country. Like by any of these numbers. Points per game, top 11. Yards per game, top 11. Passing yards per game, 2nd. Red zone points per possession, top 35. And I think that's a number that, they can improve on that. Mason Hechel had the interception in the end zone, or in the red zone, I should say, in that Florida State game. But they can get better. But again, my point is that in the last 2 games, since they made this change, they've been one of the best offenses. They've played like one of the best offenses in the country. And it's interesting how it's carried over to some of the individual players too. Like Kenny Johnson in that Boston College game set a career high in targets with 11, receptions with 9, and receiving yards with 115. Like a career day. Mason Heichel's first start produces a career day for Kenny Johnson. Desmond Reed tied his career high in that Florida State game in receiving yards with 155 and receiving touchdowns with 2. It was his third 200-yard game at Pitt and the sixth one of his career, and then the third most yards after the catch of his, maybe of his career. Definitely, maybe of his time at Pitt. He had 98 yards after the catch, but giving him an opportunity to make plays, and he goes out and does it. And then Raphael Williams. It was the second game, this Florida State game, where he caught 6 passes for 78 yards, I think. It was the second time since he got to Pitt, so second time over the last 19 games that he's had 6 or more catches in a game. It was also the 4th lowest average depth of target, ADOT, of his time at Pitt. It was about 10 yards downfield. So that number I look at and I think he's getting the receivers the ball in a place where they can catch it and make a play. Not necessarily pushing the ball downfield, not trying to get crazy with deep throws. Take them when they're there, take them when it's the right opportunity, but for the most part, he's willing to check down, make short passes, make quick passes, and pick up sure yards. And it's producing one of the best offenses in the country and some career days for some of these guys. It's remarkable. You didn't need a 15-minute podcast here on a Wednesday to tell you that Pitt's offense has been good over the last 2 games. But now you can legitimately go to your friends and say, dude, Pitt's offense has been one of the best in the country over the last 2 weeks. Like Pitt's offense, what they did in the last 2 games is right up there with some of the best offenses in college football this year. And it's legitimately true. And there's numbers to back it up. So figured I'd throw a little legal pad action out at you just to kind of get through the middle of the week. All right. I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about on the Morning Pitt tomorrow. But in the meantime, make sure you like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That way you don't miss any of our Pitt video content. And is that it? I think that might be it. Make sure you check out Panther-Lair.com. We've got all the Pitt coverage you can possibly handle. We'll put some of these numbers on there too so you can read them. You don't have to just listen to me. If you want to recite them to your friends, it'll be a lot easier if I post them online. So we'll do that as well. But in the meantime, like this video and subscribe. Don't miss any of our Pitt video content. We'll be live tonight for the Panther-Lair Show right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That'll start at 8:30. Me and Jim Hammett and you talking about Pitt sports. So make sure you tune in for that. Looking forward to it as always. All right. Like and subscribe. Have a great Wednesday. We'll catch up with you tonight for the live show and then tomorrow for the Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.